the Valdai Discussion Club. Finally, we have Kerim Has, a Moscow-based freelance political analyst on Russian and Eurasian affairs. I've asked each of our guests to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll turn this over to the audience for questions. You can send in a question at any time by emailing events@eliamep.gr, and they'll forward the question to me and the panelists. Again, that's events, EVENTS, @eliamep, ELIAMEP.gr, as in GR. I hope you will all submit questions. I'm particularly excited. We always get a very diverse and wide-ranging audience for these events. We have people from both sides of the Atlantic, both sides of the Aegean, both sides of the Black Sea. So I'm sure this will be a fascinating discussion. With that, without any further ado, let me turn this over to Professor Balta.
Hello, thanks so much for having me here today. I was asked to talk about the Turkish perspective on Turkish-Russian bilateral relations. So the first question that came to my mind when I was directed with this question is that why Turkey and Russia have developed so much foreign policy coordination in the last decade, or what really compelled the Turkish government to reach out to Russia again in the last decade. So let me give some answers to this question or questions that I posed, and then I am going to be I would like to more focus on some of the common assumptions that we have been making and what I thought is actually not correct. So let me first begin with what really compelled the Turkish government to reach out to Russia. First, cooperation with Russia enabled Turkey to counterbalance, as we all know, the American influence in Syria and specifically its collaboration with the Kurds. And really, Turkey needed the Russian collaboration in order to be present in the Syria. This was after the 2015 Russian direct intervention to Syria. Second, Turkey and Russia helped one another to become influential powers through their competition, maybe not through their coordination, in all of the conflicts that they intervened, from Nagorno-Karabakh to Libya to Syria. Third, cooperation with Russia really enabled Turkey to increase its foreign policy autonomy and specifically its negotiation power vis-a-vis its European partners, which has become very important, specifically again after the 2016 coup attempt. The other factor is that cooperation with Russia also enabled Turkey to assert itself as a normative power, effectively challenging European norms of humanitarian intervention and sometimes even democracy. Sixth, I would say sixth factor, I forgot to count, but cooperation with Russia enabled Turkey to show that outside powers that it has ways to overcome conditionalities that they are imposing on Turkey, specifically when it comes to arms purchases. And Turkey's purchase of the S-400s is an example of that. Cooperation with Russia was also important for Turkey because Russia has become the major energy provider of Turkey. It has been like that for many decades, not just in the last 10 years. Specifically after the Iranian sanctions, Russia has become the major energy provider. And through the Turk Stream, Turkey hoped to become the energy hub of the region. And in order to do that, Turkey needed Russia as well. Finally, cooperation with Russia meant outside support to the consolidation of the post-coup political regime of Turkey, which has become, as we know, very increasingly authoritarian and would have attracted more criticism had it not been its good working relationship with Russia. That said, I mean, these are some of the examples that came up to my mind when I am trying to find out what really compelled Turkey to Russia. But there are also some common assumptions we all make, as I said, that I think is incorrect when we discuss Russian-Turkish rapprochement. The first one is that this rapprochement, or this bilateral relationship, is referring to, with reference to Seçkin Köstem's really excellent article that recently came on, is not an alliance, it's an alignment. In fact, both actors do believe that alliances marked by formal defense treaties and mutual commitments can no longer offer solutions to the immediate security threats in the region. So when they have mutual expectations, and this could be minimal expectations, they develop some degree of policy coordination, they develop some degree of alignment, and this is not an alliance, as I said. Second, Russian-Turkish rapprochement is not only about leadership diplomacy. This is basically something that has been overemphasized, that the characteristics of the Putin and Erdogan is very similar, and the similarity of leadership is basically what drives them into each other. I do think it might be an important component, but I think more than that, it is based on the similarity of the decision-making processes. Yes, decision-making is very personalized, and it comes with a lot of problems, most important of which is democratic deficit, lack of public oversight. But however, I would say the outcome is rapid decision-making process that works very efficiently in this chaotic region, and both actors find it very useful rather than dealing with the bureaucracies and this and that. Another important thing, and this is the third common assumption that we usually make, and I think it's a mistake as well, Russian-Turkish rapprochement is not about the shift of axis in Turkish foreign policy. Again, both actors, I do think, are inherently flexible actors. They constantly shift their axis. Ideological and alliance shifts do not require, in both contexts, change of government. The same government shift their ideological alliance or, ideology or alliance patterns. They both maintain close ties with a number of countries that are hostile to each other. Russia, I think, is better than Turkey in terms of maintaining this, having good relations with Iran, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Israel, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, many actors in the region. And this is an important factor. I do think that being flexible gives them a lot of autonomy and enables them to do sort of balancing the powerful actors in the region. Fourth, Turkey and Russia are not order-setting actors in the region, specifically in the Middle East. In fact, the relationship, I think, takes place in the lack of an order-setting actor in the Middle East. An actor, when I said an order-setting actor, I'm basically referring to an actor that's capable of militarily and financially backing the order, having something in its mind as an end result. The United States used to be this actor, but neither Russia nor Turkey has this capacity. They don't have a long-term plan. They don't have financial and military resources to back up an order, a major order in that region. And in fact, they are not going after that sort of an order in the region. But they need each other in order to create a certain sense of stability. Fifth, Russian and Turkish rapprochement is not based on a common threat perception. I mean, this is something also I keep hearing again and again from various actors. It does not even have this stable component of, like kicking the US out of the region. It used to be, like important component of Turkish-Russian relations between 2016, maybe 2018, maybe even a bit longer than that, when United States have this working relationship with the Kurds in Syria. But that is also changing, and that keeps changing too. Turkey also wants the United States, for example, in the Black Sea to present in order to balance Russia and this and that. So in terms of their threat perceptions or in general, for example, it has been for Turkey Kurdish transnationalism, which Russia also had working relations with the Kurds. And for Russia, it has been Islamic transnationalism, even the moderate Islam, and this has been something not seen as a threat for Turkey. So what holds them together, very briefly, as I said, is their desire to balance the US, but their position even was not identical towards the US as well. So their threat perceptions have evolved and changed in the last 10 years. Sixth, this is my last 3 points, then I will finish. I know that it's probably 10 minutes now. I'm finishing up. Russia and Turkey are not taking or undertaking costly expansionist adventures that are bound to end due to their ongoing economic problems. This is something that I have been hearing over and over again from the policymakers, from the analysts. These are low-cost conflicts. Being in the region do not come with great costs to these regions, to these countries. They intervene with limited number of military personnel, limited finances. They use similar toolkits while intervening to these conflicts, like arming militias, using quasi-private actors, finding economically self-sustaining forms of involvement, such as getting shares for oil rent and this and that. So they're not costly conflicts that is bound to end. 7, the assumption of compartmentalization is also wrong. And we always assume that there is this compartmentalization dynamic. And Russia and Turkey do not compartmentalize their economic cooperation when they have geopolitical problems. In fact, this geopolitical competition that they do have increasingly evolved to an economic competition too. It has become geoeconomics. They compete with few profitable projects that exist on the ground, few natural resources that are available. This is true in Syria, this is true in Libya, and this happens in Karabakh too. And it's very asymmetrical relationship in terms of economic cooperation, with Turkey having more exit costs. Final point, one last sentence. The future of Russian-Turkish bilateral relations will not be shaped by their geopolitical competition or cooperation in their neighborhoods. It will be shaped by that, of course, but it will be mostly shaped by the Western position, because by now they have a pattern of competitive cooperation. And positioning itself within the Western security architecture gives Ankara an edge over Moscow, and a major leverage of Turkey over Moscow, but it does not coordinate its actions with the West, and the Western governments do not really ask to Turkey to coordinate its actions in order to cooperate with Russia. So that relationship, the Turkey's relationship with the West and Turkey's relationship with the relationship of the West with Russia is really going to shape the relationship between Turkey and Russia as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I feel like usually when you read some of these, 5 myths or 5 misconceptions pieces, you get through and you're like, well, those aren't really misconceptions. No one thought any of those things anyways. But in this case, I think every point you mentioned is something I've heard someone argue within just the last week. So I very much appreciate you clearing those up. I'm sure no one in our audience had any of those misconceptions, but on the off chance someone did, I hope they've been set straight. We will now turn to Fyodor. I should say in advance, he unfortunately has to leave us for another event a little before the end of the hour. So if people do have questions based on his talk, questions they want to ask him, please send them in, and I will try to give him a chance to address them before he has to leave. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. We have holiday in Russia now, which is a hidden form of lockdown without lockdown. So it's very tricky policy, information policy vis-a-vis what is happening, but anyway, it's very nice to be here during this prolonged holiday and discuss Russia-Turkey. First of all, I would like to make one observation concerning what Nicholas just said about misconceptions. I guess that today's Middle East, as today's international politics at large, cannot produce misconceptions because there are no concepts anymore. So any statement is true and wrong at the same time. So when we analyze behavior of particular countries, be it in the regional politics or on the global scale, you basically can argue about anything, and all those who participate in this argument are right and wrong simultaneously. So this is the unique pace of international development we live in. Before I go to Russia-Turkey, maybe it's important to note a little bit about what is the reason for Russia being present in the Middle East now. And here, Professor Balta, in the excellent speech, actually described everything extremely well and correctly. I can only emphasize once again that there is no idea on the Russian side to shape the Middle East, to create a new order, to create a new composition of rules, norms, powers, and so on. Nothing like this. And of course, our extremely tricky relationship with the United States is quite universal. So wherever you go with Russian foreign policy, you confront America or our perception of America. But there is nothing like an attempt by Russia to replace the United States in the Middle East. Absolutely not. And in this regard, I would even say that if we would try to identify something like a new order or emerging or disappearing order in the Middle East, we will fail, because those who normally were in charge to create this order, like great powers, big empires, big ideological superpowers as during the Cold War, all of them basically gave up. So even the United States, despite still very heavy presence in the region, I don't believe that they have any idea what to do there. And President Biden is, of course, much more polite and evasive when he talks about the Middle East. But in fact, the trend set by President Trump, withdrawing from most of areas with keeping some most important relationships, mostly commercially important relationship, that's basically what will happen in years to come. So that opens up a lot of opportunities for regional powers, first of all. And Turkey, unlike Russia, is a regional power with very clear interest there. And Russia, paradoxically, is now maybe the only outside power which has significant influence, and more than that, has a certain degree of capacity to shape events in this region. I would say that this situation was rather surprising for Russian policymakers as well, because when Russia started big military operation in Syria in 2015, Kerim certainly remembers that the main concern at that time, including concern among those who were very much in favor of Putin and his policy, the concern was that we might end up in the same way as Soviet Union in Afghanistan or Americans in the Middle East at large. So the success of this, efficiency of this operation was rather a surprise. And now, of course, the next question is what to do with this success in the future. But for now, Russia is relatively okay with confronting actual day-to-day problems there and keeping working relationship with everybody. Now we arrive to a relationship with Turkey. So I would say, I actually agree with everything what Professor Balta said. I would stress one thing which is important in order to place this relationship in a broader international context. This is an extremely unique relationship. Two countries which basically, to put it bluntly and sincerely, have zero trust to each other, I mean strategically. Interests are not just diverging, they are in most cases diametrical. Russia and Turkey support different sides in different conflicts, not just different sides, but sides who fight each other. And given the history of our relationship, and Turkey is maybe the country with Russia had most of wars in history. So given all this, it's absolutely fantastic that since 2015, okay, 16, when this incident with Russian plane shut down in Syria was settled, since that Russia and Turkey managed to overcome troubles which in other situations and with other countries would lead to very harsh consequences, including maybe military standoffs, which is not the case between Russia and Turkey. The secret is, and that was mentioned by Professor Balta, and I just emphasized that, it's not about shared interest in Syria or in Caucasus. This is an understanding, mutual understanding, that Russia and Turkey need each other not to achieve common goals, but to achieve goals which each part set for itself. And those goals are achievable only in case the other part, Turkey for Russia and Russia for Turkey, will be neutral, at least neutral, not trying to prevent the other part to act, or of course in the optimal case cooperates with the counterpart. We see that development is very, very difficult, and we face a pretty significant crisis between Russia and Turkey each year, and maybe even twice a year. Syria is the most obvious example. The Idlib question is still totally unresolved. And more than a year ago, we had an extremely tense situation which many people expected to end up in maybe even war, military standoff between Russia and Turkey. But it didn't happen, as it doesn't happen in many other cases. Southern Caucasus and Karabakh episode was especially telling, and that provoked a lot of different feelings in Russia, by the way. Those who follow Russian debate, they know that Putin's decision to basically negotiate with Erdogan the fate of Karabakh and the situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan provoked a lot of very negative emotions here, because the traditional Russian view, traditional view of those who still believe that Russia as an ex-empire should be the dominant force in all areas which previously belonged to the empire, they criticized Putin for actually letting Turkey in the conflict, which before that was an ultimate demand for Russia. And that still now you can find such criticism. At the same time, I think that in case of Karabakh, Putin acted in a way that first of all, he understood that there is no chance to keep Turkey away from this conflict, given a very close relationship between Turkey and Azerbaijan on the one hand, and as it turned out, total failure of Armenia to protect itself and to keep status quo as it was. And then, having understood that, I think Putin, maybe instinctively, and it was maybe not based on his rational calculation, instinctively made the only right decision that before that worked in Syria. And this decision is approximately that productive relationship with Turkey in conflict zones can only be based on a relative balance of military power capacities. So by accepting Turkish role in the Caucasus, which again was a very controversial decision as perceived here, he actually turned the whole relationship in this area towards a way which is very traditional and very comfortable actually for Russia, to send troops there, to station troops in Karabakh, and since that moment to rely on this. Because Russia, I think it's no secret that Russia has very weak capacity of soft power. Russia is not that advanced economically, but the only real advantage and privilege of Russia is that Russia has sufficient military capacity and readiness to use it when Russia believes it's needed. And even to extrapolate this episode on other hypothetical episodes in the future, I think that would be a Russian way to try to balance relationship with anybody who would love to actively operate in the areas which Russia believes are important. So I fully agree with the assessment that diplomacy between leaders is very important. We see that on the level of diplomats and even at the level of military people, it doesn't work well in all cases. We constantly arrive to the situation of a deadlock on this level. Then Putin and Erdogan meet. I guess that their relationship, their conversations are very open, frank, and candid, really. But they appreciate this, because what Putin, for example, I don't know what about Erdogan, but what Putin hates, he hates all this Western style hypocritical approach with a lot of words, a lot of notions and non-existing factors like human rights, democracy, and so on. When it comes to guys or girls who master this very concrete language, be it Erdogan or, for example, Bibi Netanyahu, they have very good personal relationship with Netanyahu just because of this. All interests are diametrical, but they are fine with each other. So that works pretty well. So for the future, I think, coming back to my initial point, I think this relationship is extremely important because, to some extent, Russia-Turkey relationship, as it emerged after crisis 2016, and as it continues with all troubles and obstacles, this is maybe a prototype for partnerships which will be a leading form of partnerships in years to come, not just in our area, not just in Eurasia, but broader. We see that countries more and more appreciate flexible relationships which don't bring too many commitments, because situation changes very fast, very quickly, and opportunity to change, slightly change or significantly change relationship because of changes of situation is very much appreciated by more and more governments, including governments who are involved in binding alliances. So I think that we need to follow Russian-Turkish relationship not just because the importance of this partnership for the area, but also because we can learn a little bit more about the contemporary and future international system.
Thank you so much. Since you do have to leave, let me ask you one question before you take off. Can you say a little bit about how this relationship played out vis-a-vis Ukraine in the past month?
You know, again, there is, in Russia, we have a very special debate internally, partially defined by propaganda, partially defined by all possible reactionary and obscure assessments by different people. A recent contacts between Zelensky and Erdogan, Turkey's statements about Crimea and in particular about technical military cooperation with Ukraine provoked a lot of emotions here, talking about watch, this is, he's supposed to be our ally, but watch he's doing. Which I think is a very stupid approach, because actually Erdogan has never been Russian ally. Russia was never been ally of Turkey. And that was the kind of relationship which I described, which is very rational actually. And coming to Turkey-Ukraine, I think that for Putin and for Russian leadership, there is a very clear line which has not been crossed by Erdogan yet, and I doubt that he will cross this line at all. And the line is, okay, if you want to earn money on selling arms to Ukraine, that's your right. So it's not good. We are not happy about that, but we understand it. The question is what kind of arms, and secondly, which volume. So if it will lead to significantly increased capacity of Ukrainian army, that will provoke a very harsh reaction on the Russian side, and I think Putin will say to Erdogan in very blunt terms. But Erdogan knows that, and that's why I believe that relationship around Ukraine will be not friendly but manageable.
All right, thank you so much. With that, we will turn the floor over to Kerim Has.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here. Do you hear me? Okay. I also mostly agree with Professor Balta's talks and Professor Lukyanov's also ideas, but there are also some points that I disagree, and also I have some points to talk about the title of the panel also. If to be frank and optimist, or better to say, if to be optimist, we can define the Turkish-Russian relationship, I think, with the famous Soviet singer and actor Vladimir Vysotsky, which is one of my best Soviet singers. He narrates in his song that about friendship, that if you want to test a friendship, if you want to learn that friend whether is bad or good, you should take that friend to high mountains and give him a chance and let him to be in one link with you, and you will learn there who is who. So neither friend nor a foe, just so. The relationship is in between Turkey and Russia. I think it is something else like that. It is neither friend nor a foe, just so, and they are testing each other in high mountains of Syria or Karabakh, or maybe in Libyan deserts and so on, in Ukraine maybe also. So I think if a few more words about the conceptualization about the cooperative competition or competitive cooperation, the formulation of the title of the panel, I think I would like to say a few words about the characteristics. I don't see any competition actually in Turkish-Russian relations today. It was in the 1990s actually, if we take into account the geopolitical competition at that time between Western-backed pro-Western Turkey and Russia of post-communist ideology, from Central Asia to Balkans, and from Caucasus to the other post-Soviet states, and so on. So at that time there was a competition actually. Russia was not a huge, and after the Soviet Union had huge problems inside the country. Turkey also had domestic problems, huge domestic problems in 1990s, but there was a competition at the beginning of 1990s. Also in the first decade of 2000s, I think there was a cooperation, a meaningful cooperation between Russia and Turkey. And it continued till 2011 and 12 maybe. And we can describe the happiest days between Turkey and Russia just, in my opinion, during the period from 2008, 9 till 2011 and 12. So just two to three years actually. They were the happiest days of Russia and Turkey modern history, in my view. At that time, we can see in 2008, for example, Turkish-Russian bilateral trade volume peaked 38 billions of dollars, and still we couldn't reach that level. And for example, in 2009, Turkey could establish a Turkey Council with Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. At that time, it was possible. It was not possible in 1990s. There are so many other reasons, but one of them, in 2009, the trust between Turkey and Russia was already reached, and Russia didn't impede the establishment, foundation of a Turkey Council between Turkey and those countries. And for example, it's also symbolic in my view. A first time in history, a Turkish president could visit Kazan, the capital of Tataristan, a ethnic Turkic Tatar population, you know. So it was also showing the trust between Turkey and Russia at that time. And for example, in 2008, the Georgia crisis, Turkey could easily, or maybe hardly, but could, at the end of the day, could have balanced the relations with the NATO alliance and Russia on the other hand. It was also a success. In 2010, for example, Turkey and Russia could establish a high-level cooperation council. And actually, during that time, also, Turkey and Russia could reach a deal to build the first nuclear power plant in Turkey, in a NATO country. In Turkey, Russia could reach a deal to construct such a power plant, nuclear power plant. It was showing the trust between the countries. And just after the establishment of Cooperation Council, Ankara could found similar strategic cooperation councils with Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. It was also important in my view. For example, also in 2011, there are so many examples, but just the main examples I would like to mention about the main examples. In 2000, for example, 11, Turkey and Russia could have lifted the visa regime. And it was a revolution at that time. We should also underline that point. Also in 2012, the largest Russian state bank, Sberbank, invested in the Turkish economy and purchased one of the biggest Turkish banks, Denizbank. It was also showing the trust But as Mr. Lukyanov and other professor, Mr. Balta mentioned about, there are two main events that happened after that period. In Syria, one of them, it is the war in Syria. And the second, in parallel to that, in my opinion, it is the rising authoritarianism in Turkey. They changed the structure, they changed the characteristics of those bilateral relations. I will come to that point a bit later, but during these 2 to 3 years, from 2008, 2007 to 2011, 12, those 3-4 years, we should underline one very important point. It was, I think, at that time, when Turkey could establish a good relations with Russia, Turkey had also very intense and good relations with the West. It is very important, in my opinion, because, for example, Turkey could, at that time, have successfully received the support of 151 countries out of 193 to become a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It was an achievement, historic achievement for Turkey. For example, even though there were problems with Brussels, Turkey was eagerly negotiating the membership process with the EU, and Turkey had an EU perspective in its foreign policy. Turkey was more or less become a democratic, stable, and less polarized country at that time, and had a growing economy. As I mentioned, the bilateral trade volume reached its peak amount. And Turkey also at that time seemed to solve its huge domestic problems like Kurdish issue. So my thesis here is that when Turkey has good relations with the West, actually and definitely, we also observe a more balanced relationship between Turkey and Russia, a more fruitful, more constructive and trustful, cooperative and fruitful and relationship between Moscow and Ankara. And we could at that time achieved some more noticeable outcomes actually. But after 2015 and 16, I know I talked too much, but let me speak a few minutes more. So, but after 2015 and 16, the rising authoritarianism in Turkey made, or how to say, Turkish foreign policy, the characteristic of Turkish foreign policy has cardinally changed also. Turkey started to implement not an America first, like America first policy or Turkey first policy, but rather Turkey started to implement the political survival of the ruling Turkish elite became the first in its foreign policy. So it is quite important, I think. And so how to define Russian-Turkish relations today? In my opinion, it is too much asymmetric. There is a too much asymmetric model in Turkish-Russian relations. It is highly confrontational, but also at the same time distrustful, but compulsory, extremely fragile relationship. They are not strategic partners, as Mr. Lukyanov said, but they have relations in strategic areas. And if to be frank, I would also hesitate to call Turkish-Russian relations as partnership, because partners are not attacking each other. But Turkey and Russia are, and their allies on the ground in Syria, in Libya, in Karabakh, and so on, in Ukraine also, if a war begins there, their allies, they let their allies to attack each other. It is important. Also, partnership requires a minimum level of trust and stability. But after 2015 and 16, after the so-called coup attempt in Turkey in July 2016, we just see very quick and very dangerous ups and downs in Turkish-Russian relations. It is very unstable, and it is possible that one day, at one moment, as we have, as Fyodor mentioned also, just more than 1 year ago in Idlib, we have seen there has been an attack and killing dozens of Turkish soldiers. So we observed that, so the truck can crash into the wall at any moment. Actually, it is. We should underline it. Why are the relations highly confrontational? Because it is, as Professor Balta mentioned also, it is there because the relations are extremely personalized. There is no any mechanism to de-escalate any crisis in the relations other than bilateral face-to-face meetings or urgent phone calls, actually, between President Putin and President Erdogan. So the confrontation is sometimes becomes inevitable in almost all foreign policy issues. Why is for example, why is the relationship distrustful? Because the parties, both sides, are not sure of their intentions. As also Fyodor mentioned, Ankara is buying S-400 missile systems from Moscow and facing with US sanctions for the sake of Russian missiles. But on the other hand, selling combat drones to Ukraine in a possible fight in future against Russia-backed separatist groups in Donbass, or maybe against Russia itself if the conflict grows up. So we just recently seen that Kremlin banned Russian tourists to travel to Turkey. It was also, in my opinion, a political decision. Yes, of course, there is a rise in coronavirus pandemic in Turkey, but this decision mainly based on political based on political assumptions. So similarly, Ankara is committing every time in every bilateral and trilateral summits, Astana summits, to fight against militant groups, radical Islamist groups, and so on. But on the other hand, continues to support weapons to many militant groups in Idlib. So, we can give many examples about that. Libya is also another case. Turkish government has transferred thousands of militant groups from Syria to Libya, and Russia kept silence. But when the red lines were likely to be crossed in Libya, in Sirte-Jufra axis, for example, Moscow, in harmony with Egypt and other powers on the ground, just stopped the advancement of Turkey-backed Tripoli forces. Or, as Fyodor also mentioned, in Karabakh, Moscow gave, in my opinion, a green light to Azerbaijani army and Turkey's direct military involvement in the conflict. But on the other hand, at the end of the conflict, Russia didn't let Turkey to have a meaningful mission, in meaningful presence in peacekeeping mission in Karabakh conflict, and they just established a joint monitoring center out of Karabakh, and with a symbolic number of soldiers and so on, troops. So this trust is also obvious, but also why is the relationship compulsory? Because they share the same regions and they have both common and colliding interests. So and also, in my opinion, in different levels, they both have high capacity and instruments to harm each other. It is very important. because they both have, they are both capable to hurt each other enormously, I can say. Turkey can block Russia-led peace process in Syria, but whereas Moscow can heavily carry out attacks against Ankara-backed militant groups in Idlib and so on, and can create refugee crisis or can use refugee and Kurdish cards against Turkish interests, actually. So, or for example, Moscow uses Ankara to drive a wedge in NATO alliance, whereas Mr. Erdogan needs President Putin to ensure support of a foreign influential power if in case Mr. Erdogan faces an existential threat against his personal power. So we can absolutely talk about this topic for so long, but let me stop here. Maybe just one more sentence. I think until, as I said, until the truck crashed into the wall, I think the Turkish-Russian relations will be mostly based on risk management, and there will be some new topics, hot topics, worrisome topics that we will discuss in the future in Turkish-Russian relations. One of them it is definite in my opinion, it is radicalism and jihadist threat. And the second one is we are not discussing it, but it is extremely important in my opinion. It is the collapsing institutional state structure of Turkey in recent years. So it is a huge threat not only for Russian-Turkish relations, but also whole region, but also the European Union and so on. We will discuss about that in the future, in my opinion, regarding the Turkish-Russian relations. The Kurdish, the unresolved Kurdish question problem is gaining new momentum and will definitely remain to be a growing headache in Turkish-Russian relations in the future. With the Biden administration in the United States, I also think so. And also fourth issue, maybe we will probably talk about that in the future. As Turkey gets poorer, it will become more open and vulnerable to foreign intervention, and it will likely cause new destructive elements in Turkish-Russian relations, both inside and outside, and will create new risks for Russia. And fifth, maybe like many other countries, I also think that it seems to me that Russia also has any post-Erdogan strategy. It doesn't mean that I am calling Russia to work out or for a regime change in Turkey. No, just I mean that Moscow should not put all the eggs in the same basket in Turkish politics. Moscow should diversify its relations with opposition groups and so on in Turkey. I know that it is something different for Moscow, but it is already a must to keep the relations after, if at any time happens, in a post-Erdogan period, I can say. So sorry for long, brother.
Quite okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you doing a historical overview of an era, a brief era from 2008 to 2012 that often does get overlooked in this conversation. I think, as you point out, right, so much of our conversation today about improved Turkish-Russian relations, at least the way it plays out in the United States, is clear. It's not necessarily about what we would traditionally think of as good bilateral relations between two states, which, again, as you point out, has actually, may have been in place between Turkey and Russia in a previous era. But when we talk about good Turkish-Russian relations today, it's very much more about a particular geopolitical dynamic, and it's very much implicitly framed in the context of a breakdown of U.S.-Turkish and EU-Turkish relations, and that it's that geopolitical context that makes us more focused on how good Turkish-Russian relations are now than we were in an era when they might have, again, in some traditional sense, been better. So exactly, things like Russia building a nuclear plant in Turkey today has suddenly become an issue of alarm in a way that it wasn't necessarily when those plans were initially laid.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, again, I would encourage people to write in with any questions. It's events@eliamep.gr. I will take the opportunity to ask a couple questions first. Evren, I'm eager to hear your thoughts. This was probably the longest discussion of Turkish-Russian relations that I, sitting in Washington, have ever heard before someone mentioned NATO. And the point that Kerim brought up at the end is one that I think is the starting point for many conversations about Turkey and Russia in the United States, namely that Russia's goal is to drive a wedge between Turkey and NATO. I'm curious if you think, is that something we should take for granted? Is that a misconception we should push back against? Well, I'll ask that, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question.
Very briefly, I mean, if Fyodor Lukyanov was here, probably he would say the same thing because we were asked with the same question. We were directed with the same question in a previous panel that we were together. And we both agreed on the fact that neither Russia nor Turkey wanted to deteriorate Turkey's relationship with NATO. I mean, your question was that whether Russia was trying to drive a wedge between Turkey and NATO is basically maybe an unintended consequence of Russian actions, right? Not coming directly from NATO, from a plan out of Russian foreign policy that we should have, you know, like these problems, we should create these problems between Turkey and NATO, but it is basically maybe unintended consequence of Russian policy. But at the same time, what you see in the Black Sea, for example, Turkey for many years, even in fact in the period that Kerim Has was mentioning, tried to keep NATO away from the Black Sea, right? And tried to be one of the major power that is controlling or balancing Russia in the Black Sea. So with these Russian actions, specifically the strengthening of Russian naval capacity in the Black Sea, or the annexation of Crimea, or Russian presence more Russian presence in the Black Sea really drive Turkey towards NATO. And Turkey has become more, in a position to develop its relationship with NATO, specifically when it comes to the Black Sea region. So you see both ways. I mean, in one hand, because of that close collaboration, Turkey and NATO, specifically as 400s, having a lot of problems between each other, among the organization, but at the same time, it really helps Turkey to develop better relations with NATO to balance Russia. And the Turkey's act here is basically balance Russia with NATO, balance NATO with Russia. That's the flexibility what Fyodor and I was talking about, basically.
Sorry, if I could follow up on that, let me ask, I mean, I think you described the balancing act that Turkey would like to carry out very well. My question would be, to what extent has this been facilitated by, I don't want to say there have been no tensions in US-Russian relations or in NATO-Russian relations, but to what extent would, growing tensions between the West and Russia, be it over Ukraine, be it over somewhere else, make it difficult for Turkey to carry out this balancing act? I mean, how far can they push it?
Well, this really goes back to this. Oh, I'm muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay, so this really goes back to the last point that I was mentioning in my presentation, the future of the Russian-Turkish bilateral relations being shaped by Turkey's relationship with the West, but not only with Turkey's relationship with the West, but also Russia's relationship with the Western actors. What has been happening up until right now that Ankara uses the leverage of its relationship with NATO and the West over Russia, right, to negotiate with Russia. It's the major power dynamic of Turkey over Russia, or the major leverage of Turkey over Russia. But this is basically, this basically relies upon a basic fact. It's this, that it's the position of this Western actors and the Transatlantic Alliance in general is not conditional up until so far on Turkey's coordinating with the West in its relationship with with Russia, basically. So Turkey goes away with that, right? I mean, there are there are sanctions coming from the Biden administration because of the S-400s and this and that, but you see basically a lot of fissures, a lot of divergence within the West itself with its position over Russia. I mean, you see this divergence in the European Union as well. The France's position is completely different from the Germany's position. Germany's position is different from the Baltic states, and lots of divergence. And there's a lot of pressure coming from the United States to the European Union, for example, specifically on Germany because of the Nord Stream. Lots of problems. And this, like this European, how to say, this uncoordination with regard to the Russia in general, within the West, within the European Union, is basically what drives or what shapes Turkish position towards Russia.
Kerim, do you want to weigh in on that?
Actually, as I said, Turkey, let me say it like that. The Turkish foreign policy, mainly in the recent years, is based on not Turkey's own interest, in my opinion. For example, I cannot see any benefit for Turkey from supporting the jihadist groups or militant groups in Syria. Or, for example, in my opinion, Turkey should have played a mediator role in Libya, but just became a side of the conflict and supported the one side, Tripoli, and just minimized its interest, actually. But the ruling Turkish political elite made huge money in Libya, as in Syria, and so on. So when we evaluate the interests or the relations between Turkey and the West and relations between Turkey and Russia, I think we should already concentrate much more on personalized relations, actually. There is, I don't see, I'm frankly speaking, I don't see any benefit from this kind of Turkish policy in Syria. So Turkey first should solve its own Kurdish question, Kurdish problem inside the country, becoming more democratic, respecting human rights, more respecting human rights and so on, becoming more democratic country. And then Turkey can work out on Syrian strategies, in my opinion. But so we many experts are talking about as if we are in the period of 2005, 6, and so on. There is a foreign policy mechanism that is working, and the decision-making process is everything so normal. No, there is not such a situation in Turkey now. There is just, of course, a one-man rule, and also his inner circle is taking decisions, critical decisions in foreign policy that affects Turkey as a country. For example, S-400s, as we said, Turkey bought S-400 missiles from Russia, but even still now couldn't activate them. So it seems to me very absurd to buy Russian missiles for the sake of US sanctions. So that's all.
Do you want to respond, Professor Balta?
Respond to...
to any of that before we move on to the next question.
No. All right. Yeah.
Okay. So this has been an excellent overview a number of broader dynamics affecting the relationship. If anything, I think usually when you have these panels, people delve far too much into the specifics and we miss some of the broader conceptualization that I'm very glad everyone did and such a good job of presenting here. But this does lead me to wanting to ask, and since we have a little more time here, and one very specific question, which is about how this is going to play out in Syria and specifically play out in Idlib. Fyodor pointed out that last spring, this was a situation where people were expecting the worst. People were expecting that this could create a direct military conflict between Turkey and Russia. That obviously things got tense. There was actual military violence, but it was contained. Now, again, looking forward, at least the people I talk to in the United States, you have an odd divergence of opinion. You have some people convinced that what happened last spring was, Turkey using hard power, showing its resolve, standing up to Russia, and basically ending this dynamic of consistent regime and Russian gains in Syria, transforming the situation in a way that was going to have a permanent and lasting impact. You had other people who saw what happened last spring as simply a replay of what had been the existing dynamic. Basically that Russia and the regime pushed, Turkey pushed back a little bit. At the end, Russia proved its willingness to escalate. And after some brief fighting, basically Turkey went to Moscow, backed down, and you had a new ceasefire which enshrined the regime's gains. And what strikes me is I think you have people who now are operating with both of these prevailing assumptions about what's going to happen next. And yet it's not, I for one am not entirely clear on who's right. It does seem like Turkey has invested an enormous amount of military manpower in the region, more so than it would if it was just planning on backing down again. And yet at the same time, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that Russia, and particularly the regime, have abandoned their goal of retaking most of the country. So with that overly long question on my part, let me ask both of our participants, what's actually likely to happen? Will this be resolved again as it has in the past, or will this be the thing that creates the car crash in Turkish-Russian relations?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Very difficult question. I mean, no one knows. So we were expecting, for example, last year, just right before the Corona crisis, that there was going to be a major rift and even a war between Russia and Turkey, specifically on the question of Idlib, and nothing happened. And the same thing kept happening over and over. And it seems that, as you said, perfectly said in your question, that no one is really backing up from their initial aims, which seem to be quite diametrical, quite opposed to each other. But here is the thing. The situation as it is right now seems to be a bit stabilized, both in Idlib and in the other parts of Syria. So Assad is basically consolidated its power in the majority of the region thanks to Russia and Turkey. Astana process removed basically the international mediation mechanisms that were set up by the United Nations, like the Geneva and this and that, so no other actor is really present in Syria to be able to negotiate a different type of solution. And the presence of Turkey and Russia also curbed Iran's influence in Syria as well. So Ankara's pressure on the U.S. to withdraw from Syria also worked well and helped to both actors, to both to Russia and Turkey. So everyone, in a sense, in this quite weird kind of balance, seem to have sort of a working relationship and doesn't want to disturb it. But still, the problem, for example, one of the major problems is that, and Russia keeps saying that it's not really happy about that, Ankara is extending not only its military presence, but its administrative structure in the northeastern Syria, like to administrative health capacities, opening schools, printing money, and this and that, and sort of a, double sovereignty a situation in which both Assad and Russia, Putin, said that they would not be able to tolerate in the mid or longer term. So how that is going to play out is a very important thing, like this Turkish presence in the northern Syria and the Kurdish populated regions. I don't know how is it going to work out, and Idlib is still a problem. But given that no one is really interested, specifically the Western actors are not really interested in really solving the humanitarian crisis that's going on in the Idlib situation. So it's basically, and Russia is less appealing in the sense that lots of humanitarian crisis, human rights violations, bombing civilians, hospitals, and this and that. So in essence, still both Assad and Russia needs Turkey to be present in the opposition-controlled regions and to control the opposition. So that balance, I think, is still working and will keep working in the near future.
Kerim?
Maybe I can add a few things here. I think the ceasefire in Idlib is also quite fragile. And I think that Russia will not leave Idlib as it is now. Probably they are searching for a suitable time to launch a new military offensive. And it will highly likely will be after the elections in May in Syria, after the Assad regime will be much more strong, strengthen its position. Of course, it is not elections as we understand, but it gives a legitimacy in the eyes of Russia and Russian allies. I think the Idlib issue, we will talk about that in the following months, because the last ceasefire deal couldn't be implemented totally. As you know, the security corridor on the M4 highway couldn't be established with 12 kilometers width. So probably the Syrian army will start an offensive to take control the M4 highway. But for that we should wait a bit, I think, because when the United States also will increase pressure on Turkish government, it is also directly related with the Halkbank and Zarrab case in New York that will start soon. Probably when the Turkish government will be stuck in again in the West, in US and Russia, so they just take the advantage. Syria will take the advantage of that difficult situation of Turkish government in the following months. Because I don't think that it will be left as it is. But the Kurdish question, the negotiations with the Kurds, it is continuing, but there is no any concrete result. It also mainly depends on a deal between Russia and Turkey on the oil refineries and resources and the ports, using of ports, I mean. So there can be some change in the following period also, if the negotiations between the United States and Moscow can deepen on Kurdish question in Syria. We can also see some increasing pressure about the Kurdish problem on not only on Assad regime but also on Turkish government. It is possible. I do not exclude a new process, totally peace process between Erdogan and Kurds or Kurdish groups in the region in the total picture, I think.
That could take this conversation off in a whole nother direction, which I will refrain from going in. For the moment, we have time for one final question. I want to ask both of you, what is Russia's position? What is Russia's perspective on the Eastern Med, on Greek-Turkish tensions, both in the Aegean and, as it relates to Libya, and on the Cyprus question? Let's start with Evren again, and then.
Well, the area, the region has really become a playground for multiple proxy wars, a battlefield. It's really a mess. In terms of alliances that are shaping the region, is really a mess. And Russia has increased political contact with every Mediterranean country. This really goes back to what I said in the beginning, that this is a very flexible actor that is able to talk every single country to the, countries that are in very bad relationship with each other. It really emerges. Russia as a country emerges as a mediator and offers to mediate the conflict. Remember, at the end of the 2020, it offered to the Cyprus and to the Greek governments to mediate their conflict with Turkey. So it sees itself and wants to be seen as the mediator. But one important thing, this is what Lukyanov has also mentioned, Russia keeps mentioning or stressing its economic interests over the political interests. It's very important for Russia to cooperate with Turkey, for example, in the East Med, if energy projects in the region are deemed commercially viable. So they keep saying that whether you are offering us a commercially viable project, then we'll cooperate with you. If Turkey offers it, then we'll cooperate with Turkey. If Greece offers it, then we'll cooperate with Greece. But the thing is that specifically with the emergence of the Eastern Mediterranean gas forum, this, I think, made Russia a bit anxious about, countering its own interests, specifically its interest in delivering natural gas to Europe as being the primary exporter of natural gas to Europe. So it wants to be a part in that forum, in that emerging alliance as well. It's very important for Russia to become a part of that. And one thing that I would like to say is that Russia is developing really, really good relations with Egypt. Lots of agreements, trade agreements, nuclear power plant agreements, natural gas agreements, lots of agreements really, specifically in the last 2 years. Russia, as Lukyanov has already mentioned as well, very good in working relations with Israel as well. So with all these actors, with Cyprus too, right? With commercial interests, Russian business people present in Cyprus. So it really is an actor, an anxious actor, I would say, but its commercial interests really shapes overall its alliance patterns and behavior, I would say.
Maybe I can also say a few words here.
So, please.
Okay. Thank you. In the recent months, the Russian embassy in Greece has declared about the problems between Turkey and Greece in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and Russia's position seems to be much more closer to Greece rather Turkey's. But it doesn't mean that, I think, it doesn't mean that Russia fully supports Greece's position also. As Professor Balta mentioned, Russia more or less has intense and good relations, almost all of the actors in the region, from Israel to Greece, from Turkey to Egypt, from the Palestinian Authority to Syria and so on. So I think Russia, in my opinion, doesn't want any conflict, any direct hot conflict in Eastern Mediterranean. Russia wants to make money there, actually. Russian energy firms are nowadays also searching for oil and gas in Syrian territorial shelves. So I think, and also there is another aspect of the issue. It is the intersection of Cyprus issue with the Eastern Mediterranean energy resource and delimitation agreements and so on. Turkey mostly isolated itself in the region, in my opinion, with its own decisions and own steps that were taken in the last 2 years, especially. Turkey itself pushed Greece to sign a deal with Egypt, and it is much more acceptable by the international authorities. So I think Russia doesn't want any conflict and just wants to make money there, and just tries to influence. It tries to increase its influence in the region. There are risks that can emerge in the following period, but probably there will be another level between the big powers, between Russia and the other United Nations Security Council members, permanent members, and there will be another discussion between them, I think. For example, Britain, Great Britain seems to be much more supportive of Turkey's position in Cyprus, but Russia is quite angry on Britain's position there. About this, there is a discussion nowadays, 2 community states and so on the Cyprus issue, but Russia mostly keeps its position as a united Cyprus. So there are also other, many ties between Russia and Cyprus, oligarchs and so on. But in my opinion, Russia will try to balance its relations in the Eastern Mediterranean. Will try to not to get into conflict with any of the actors. So we will see.
Yes.
Maybe one more thing I can add to that, just very quickly, the one more recent and important development was Russia's signing of the natural gas extraction agreement with the Syrian government, which happened just a month ago, which really complicated things a lot because it discomforted Lebanon a lot, which is also having problems with Israel. So there are lots of things going on, and it's sometimes even for Russia very difficult not to discomfort any of these axes. That is, like reconfiguring the balance of power or reconfiguring the relations in the East Med.
All right. Unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. Thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you to our panelists, Kerim, Evren, Fyodor, and Absentia. I think we all went into this thinking this was a very complicated relationship, and are probably coming out of it thinking that it's even more complicated than we originally thought. Thank you all once again, and look forward to having everyone back here on future ELIAMEP panels going forward.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all.
Bye.